we don't break any laws. Okay, so I'm recording, so everything's recording. And let me just, do you have any questions or anything about, we talked already with this.
No, I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
fine.
you've been interviewed by better people and many times, I'm sure. So we'll just talk
about that. We'll see.
All right. Today on the podcast, we're back in Western Pennsylvania with somebody who started well before the 70s, running, setting records, getting accomplishments, coaching, developing young runners for many decades, a name well known to everybody in running in the 70s from earlier and on through. We'll just get started. Welcome on the podcast today, Sam Bair. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Sam, let's get you introduced from, we're going to ask you to go way back, your earliest memories of you ever getting involved in competitive sports of any kind or your first races. Why, where, and how did you get involved in competing in sports?
Well, I became interested in all sports at a very early age. I got involved with what we called minor league baseball, which was before Little League baseball, when I was 6 years old. I had a next door neighbor who came to my house, knocked on my door, and told my mom that he was in the Little League, and he said, there's a minor league that's starting up at the high school. Can I take Sam up and have him join? So this older boy, who was actually 5 years older than I was, walked me up, and I got involved in baseball for the first time. And that was actually the first sport that I ever got involved in. But from that time on, I continued to play all sports from the time I was 6 years old until I graduated from high school. Unlike what you see a lot of runners today who get involved in running and that's their only sport, from the time I was 6 years old, I played baseball every year until I finished with the Pony League. I played basketball every year until I graduated from high school. And I played football every year until I graduated from high school on my school teams. So, a lot of people, when we go back and we talk about our running careers, my actual running career itself didn't start until March of my senior year. For example, my very last basketball game, when I played high school basketball game, was on February 28th of my senior year. And the very next day, I'd actually laid out my running gear the night of my last high school basketball game so that I could get up the next morning and start running to get ready for spring track my senior year. So I just went from one sport to the next until I graduated from high school. Actually graduated from high school. I had 3 months of training under my belt when I graduated high school. Then I became a real runner. So I was, unlike what you see a lot of youngsters today, staying with one sport. I played 3 sports or 4 sports throughout my lifetime. And probably one of the most proudest moments I had was the first time I broke 4 minutes. I had only been training for 3 years and 3 months full time.
Let me ask you about that whole period up through high school. What was your identity? Was it tied to one of any of the sports more strongly, or were you just an athlete?
Well, I was just an athlete primarily. Basketball was actually my favorite sport. I loved basketball. But if you saw me in person, I'm 5'6" and a quarter, and I weighed at that time 120 pounds, 118 pounds. Now I weigh about 130. So I haven't gained a lot of weight over the years. So I love basketball. I spent most of my summers playing baseball and on a basketball court in the afternoons. I used to get up in the mornings when I was, probably the time I was a freshman, and go to a basketball court and try to find some guys to play some games. So I was always active. I was never in the house. And most of the people who are my age, I would suspect they were outside on their bicycles going from one sand lot to the other or one basketball court to the other, just staying active throughout the day in the summers. And then during the school times, I was always playing a sport. I don't think there was ever a time that I was not involved in some type of athletics.
Let's get some of the details here. What was your high school?
My high school was Scottdale Joint High School in Scottdale, Pennsylvania, which is now a jointure. It is now called Southmoreland Area High School. And it's about, the school itself is about 60 miles southeast of Pittsburgh.
And right up through February 28th of your senior year, what was your best accomplishments in those sports, and what was the impact on you of your coaches as a person, and what you thought about the future of your activity in sports would be?
I always had an idea that I was going to end up as a runner and that I wanted to go to college and be a runner in college. And it was obviously because of my size. When I was playing football, my junior and senior year, I started at wide. It was called a wing back then, but it was actually a flanker position. I put out wide, and they throw passes to me and run some reverses, things like that. And I was a point guard on the basketball team, and I was actually a first team all section point guard my senior year. And over the 2-year period that I played football, I scored 12 touchdowns. And then I loved track, but I was new at the sport, and I was always trying to learn about the sport. So I spent a lot of my free time. We had a couple of stores in my hometown. Today we'd call them mini markets, but they were stores that had magazines. So I used to go into these stores. They were candy stores that sold magazines and just some junk. And I would go through the magazines and look for running articles. And if there was any kind of a running article in the magazine, I would buy it, bring it home, cut the article out, and put it into a folder and save it, trying to learn about how to be a good runner. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. And a lot of the coaches that I had were great. They encouraged me to get involved in sport. When I actually got serious about running, my sophomore year in high school, I was a sprinter, and my best friend was an 800-meter runner. And about halfway through the season, as I was running, I was like our second best sprinter on our team. I was fast, but at 5'6", or at that time it was 5'4", my sophomore year, and 110 pounds. I mean, let's face it. So my best friend had a heart murmur, and he had to quit the track team. And I went to the coach my sophomore year, and I said, we were halfway through the season. We only had 6 meets left. And I went to him and I said, do you think I could try the 800-meter run? It was 880 then, to see what I could do, because we need points for track. So he said, well, yeah, go ahead, give it a try. So in my very first race, I ran a 2:12, 880. The next meet, I ran 2:10. And then I ended up running 2:08 in another meet. And then we went to our county championships. I ended up running 2:03. Then we went to our WPIAL championships, which was the district championships here in Pennsylvania. Ran 2:02 that qualified me for the state meet. And I ended up running 2 flat, 2 minutes and 0.2 of a second my sophomore year at the state meet and finishing second. And that was it. I had run in 6 or 7 meets, went from nothing to 2 flat in the 800 with no experience, no background. And I thought, wow, maybe this is my sport, and maybe someday I could be a good 800-meter runner. But I always, because I was very aware of my size, that I was going to run the mile. I always felt that. I felt that I had good speed. And I had noticed that I had some aerobic ability, which kind of surprised me, because most of the kids my age They couldn't start with running 212 and 6 or 7 meets later run 2 flat. So I had this natural aerobic capacity that maybe it was natural, but I also had been involved in sports my entire life. So I was always on the move. I could not sit in the house and read books or watch television. Of course, you can remember we only had 3 different channels on our TVs anyway. So I was never inside. I was always outside playing. So once I got all that figured out, I realized that one of these days I was going to be a runner.
Let's just set this stage again. In that era where you were going and finding these running magazines, who was in them? What year was it? And who were the people in those magazines? Who were the people that were your...
It wasn't until I got a little bit older. Now I'm thinking I was probably in the junior high, and I started seeing some Sports Illustrated articles about Jim Beatty, who was the first American to run under 4 minutes indoors. And I remember reading articles about him because he was only 5'6" tall. He weighed 130 pounds. And in my mind, I formed this idea, well, if this guy is that size, maybe I can do it. I tried to find all the information I could about him. It was somewhat limited in the kind of work he was doing because his coach was a guy named Mihaly Igloy, who had this, he was a coach, and they ran a lot of what we would term it now as interval work at different speeds. And it was kind of secretive to them, and there was never anything on the page about him. So I also found this other guy from New Zealand whose name was Peter Snell, which everyone knew who Peter Snell was. And his coach was Arthur Lydiard. And Lydiard, there was a lot of print about Arthur Lydiard and his training methods that involved a lot of strength work, long distance training. And he had this guy, Snell, doing that kind of work. So over a period of time, I was able to get my hands on some information about Snell in some of these magazines. And then I always, with the articles that I saved, and always in the back of my mind, I had formed my own type of training methods that I was going to use when spring track came around for me my junior year. After my sophomore year, I kind of got serious about the sport. And I had seen that Snell was running twice a day, 100 miles a week, yada, yada, yada. And so I figured out my own schedule so that when the end of basketball season came, I would get up in the mornings before school and I would run 3 miles. And then I would go to school and I would do a workout in the afternoon after school. So I sort of formed my early years. I was motivated by Beatty with his size and with Snell, i.e. Lydiard, with the training, because that was the only information at the time that was available. And if you look at nowadays, it's all changed. The science is there, the technology is there. There's so much more now. But in those days, you just had to search for some kind of training method. And when I hit on the Lydiard information that was actually right there for me in print, I had a schedule that I could follow that finally made sense to me.
I want to ask you about 2 things from then. One is just the equipment. What kind of equipment and shoes did you have then? Then I'd like to go on to when did you address and start figuring out race tactics?
Well, the equipment was so rudimentary, it's almost ridiculous when I think about it. Like I said, when basketball ended, we got to keep...
Let me interrupt you. Is there a way you can adjust the angle of the camera? It's cutting off your chin. That's it.
See here.
Yeah, just keep it every once in a while going. You're good. Okay. Let's talk equipment.
At the end of basketball season each year, we got to keep our Chuck Taylor Converse basketball shoes. So like I said, the end of my last basketball game, I got up in the morning. My running gear was already laid out. So I jumped out of bed, put, oh my gosh, cotton sweatpants. I had a pair of cotton sweatpants. I had a hoodie, a turtleneck, cotton turtleneck, and a stocking cap and gloves. And I would go out and hit the road first thing in the morning after my last basketball game. And
And your Converse and your Chuck Taylors.
those
Connors, yeah.
Chuck Taylors served the purpose for me throughout the season. That's what I wore. And the track spikes were, I think my dad or we sent away for a pair of track spikes that were Wilson, heavy leather Wilson track spikes that we used. And I actually didn't even start wearing a windbreaker until I went away to college. I mean, I was always just wearing heavy hoodies, going out in the nasty weather with just a hoodie on and training. I mean, it's embarrassing to say what kind of training gear was available in those days, because it wasn't there. It was such a different time, so much different than what we have today.
And so let's talk about those early years of racing. Did you see anybody with any better equipment, or everybody was the same? No,
most of the guys that I saw pretty much wore the same gear. And now get back to your second question about the racing tactics. I was so new at the sport that I had no racing tactics. As an 800-meter runner, I actually by the time we got to my junior year, after the basketball season ended, in my very first track meet, my junior year, which was 4 weeks after basketball season ended, we ran an exhibition meet, and I can remember this very well, at Hempfield Area High School, which was a larger high school than the one that I went to. And I ended up running a 157-800 after 4 weeks of training in a practice meet. And basically, I just went out hard and hung on. And those were my racing tactics throughout high school. At the time, the competition didn't have the depth that we have today. So I would just generally start and open up with a 55 or a 56-second 400 and then hang on at the end. And that's how I ran my races. And by today's standards, I was a decent runner, but I was a good runner then, but by today's standards, obviously, it just didn't compare. My junior year, I believe my PR was 156.2 in the 880, and my senior year, I ran 155.4 in the 880 in our county meet, which was the best time that I had for the year. And yet, I won both state meets at the Class B level, not the Class A level. There were two classes in those days in Pennsylvania, and at the Class B level. So I only really had a handful of scholarship offers at the time.
Let me just find out. I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me ask you about exactly what year that was and where were they held. By the time I was running in the 70s, it was Beaver Stadium, Penn State. Where were the state meets?
It was in Beaver Stadium. Yeah.
Okay. And what year was your senior year in high school?
1964 was my senior year. And I only had a few scholarship offers at the time because, like I said, I was good, but I wasn't a superstar or anything. And my times were decent on cinders. I had an offer from the University of Pittsburgh, from Penn State, West Virginia, Ohio University, and Kent State. Those were the offers that I had. And I chose Kent State.
Yeah, we know you went to Kent State and had a good career there. How were you let's just finish off the high school. How were you as a student?
I was slightly better than average. Now, funny you should mention that. I didn't like school. When I went to college, I didn't like going to class when I was in college. I hate to bring this up, and I was probably an OCD trainer at the time. I loved to run. And my only thought was, when I went away to college, where can I find a school that has a rural type of atmosphere like I had at home, or within an 800 meters of my house, I could be out in the countryside running. And I visited Penn State, too big for me. I didn't want to go to Ohio University, even though that would have been a great school, because Stan Huntsman was the head coach at Ohio U. He had some great teams down there. But I visited Kent, and the Kent was a small town, and it was kind of a rural atmosphere, and that's why I went to Kent. My SAT scores were low. I'm embarrassed to say what they were. And when I got to Kent, if you'd like me to go into that career, I can go into it very quickly, and then we can go back to it later.
Let's just say, what did Kent offer you? How did they? What were the enticements for you to go there?
Kent State offered me a full scholarship with the exception of out-of-state tuition. My freshman year, I paid out-of-state tuition to go to school. I nearly flunked out of school my freshman year, my first semester. I was way in over my head. Academically, I wasn't prepared, and it was my own fault. All I was interested in was playing sports in high school, so I didn't care much about academics. So the second semester, I took a lower course load. I took 12 credits instead of 15, got my eligibility back because I was not eligible. And then for the next 4 years, instead of taking 15 credits a semester, I took 12 credits a semester. I also would go to summer school and take credits to catch up. And then it took me 5 years and 1 semester, extra semester of student teaching to graduate from Kent. And my grades at the time were average. And again, it had to do more with just my lack of attention. I was always training, loved to run. And that's just the way my personality worked. That's just how I was. Now,
well, that focus led to a Hall of Fame career. What were your own expectations for your events, your performance, and how was the coaching?
My coach at Kent State, he was a good coach. However, in those days, most of your head coaches had 1 or 2 assistants. Now they've got an assistant coach for every event practically. So whenever I got to Kent, I had a number of workouts written down on paper that I had gotten out of the Snell book, his first book, No Bugles, No Drums. And within the first year that I was there, if you recall, Jim Ryan was starting to get involved in running. So there was a magazine called Track Technique where Bobby Timmons would throw some workouts in that he had given to Ryan for training. And I wrote all these workouts down, and I had a list of maybe 10 different types of workouts, so that during the track season, cross country season, Doug Raymond was our head coach, would give us the workouts during cross country. During the track season, Doug Raymond was taken from one area of coaching to the other: high jump, pole vault, shot put. So even though we had an assistant coach who was a distance coach, I had a list of training or workouts. So I would just take the workouts and show them to the coach and say, and he would agree with me. He'd say, well, all right, you're going to do 12 times 400 today. Tomorrow you're going to do, and I had a list. You do 4 400s, 4 300s, 4 200s, 3 days later. So I had a list of workouts. So training at that time, again, wasn't as scientific as it is now. We just got things out of magazines. And so I used those types of workouts whenever I was training for track. So it was,
What kind of teammates did you have? Where were you? Were you a star runner immediately, or what'd you have for teammates? And did you get something beside a cotton hoodie?
yeah, as soon as I got there, I was probably the school's best runner. And I'm not bragging about that. It was just that, uh, like I said, as soon as I graduated from high school, I was doing double workouts uh, during school, but then I started cranking out the mileage. And by the time I got to Kent my freshman year, I was putting in 100-mile weeks, and I am not exaggerating. And had finally found some shoes uh, that I could wear that were actual running shoes that I got out of a couple of different magazines. And I had a roommate at the time. His name was Dave Wise, and he loved the marathon. He was an average distance runner, but he was a 2:30 marathoner. So Dave and I would get up in the early morning and train. And when I got to Kent, he and I we'd do 50-minute to an hour run in the mornings, and then I'd go out and do whatever the team was doing in the afternoon or whatever workouts I had. So I was really cranking out the miles all through my college career. And my coach, freshmen were not eligible in those days. So I only ran a few freshman meets, and I twice ran the mile in 4:10 as a freshman with less than a year's training under my belt. And my freshman year, I woke up one morning, it was in May, and I was sick in my stomach. And I went out into the hall and went to the bathroom. And I sat down on the toilet. And to make a long story short, I was bleeding internally.
Wow. Let's check the camera angle again here.
All right. And when I stood up out of the john, I fell down on the floor and passed out. But because I was lying on my back, I had enough blood left in my body. My circulation came back, and I crawled out into the hallway and called out to my roommate, and he came and picked me up, called an ambulance, and I was taken to the hospital with a bleeding ulcer. And they told me I was lucky that I actually survived that experience, because I remember when I got there, they gave me 2 pints of blood right away. And I had a bleeding ulcer my freshman year outdoors. So I didn't really have an outdoor season my freshman year. So by the time I came back as a sophomore, I ended up running 4:04 my sophomore year, 3:58 as a junior. Senior year ran 3:59, and in the year that I was doing my student teaching, ran 3:56, mile 3:56, all on cinders. So from that time, I really had a vast improvement, but I also did a lot of work during the season itself. And in the off season, I would come home and train all summer long and hammer out a lot of mileage. I was very, very fortunate not to break down physically. For some reason, I probably was an efficient runner. And because I was light on my feet, when you only weigh 120 pounds, your body doesn't take a lot of damage. So I was able to get in a ton of mileage, and I had some pretty good success. I sure wish I could go back and do the kind of work kids are doing now. I would love to do some of the work that I've seen young kids doing because all of the runners of that era, if they could go back and do the kind of work that's going on right now, they would certainly have a lot of success, including guys like Tim Roth.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about that ulcer. I mean, now we know Heliobacter virus, etc. What did they tell you was the cause? And was that a one-time thing for you?
It was a one-time thing for me. Most we know more nowadays about why you get these things, like the Heliobacter. But in those days, they thought it was stress. It was just stress related, and that may have been
Of course.
what caused it. And that's a possibility.
Okay.
Now,
You're under four.
I spent a lot of time taking antacids after that, and still do for that matter.
All right. So you had gone under 4 minutes, and what was your identity as a runner was firmly came to be. What was your view of what would happen after university? What did you set your sights on? What year was your senior year at Kent?
My senior year at Kent was 1968. Indoors, during my 3 indoor track seasons, NCAA, I finished second in the indoor mile, sophomore, junior, and senior years. My junior and senior years, I lost to Jim Ryan. And there was no way, Ryan was on his game when he was at Kansas. And then a year after he got out of school, he was still running extremely well. My sophomore year, I was 5th in the NCAA outdoor mile, 3rd my junior year in the outdoor mile, and 4th my senior year in the outdoor mile. So I had some pretty good success throughout those 3 years. In 69, I was still at Kent. So that's when I was student teaching. And in the spring of that year, I was only taking 6 credits. So in the spring of that year, I was training extremely well. Now, this was 69, and that's when I ran my fastest mile time. Ended up running 3:56 against Ryan, finishing second in the Compton Coliseum Invitational. And then once I graduated, I went out and I ran for the Pacific Coast Club on the West Coast for a year. Didn't work out. Working 8 hours a day was very difficult for any serious runner, the kind of runner I was when I needed to do the mileage, get the work in, be at work at 8 o'clock, finish up at 5. It's dark in the winter, whether you're in California or Western Pennsylvania, it's still the same. It's dark at 5 o'clock. I just never get the work in after that. Came back and lived in Pittsburgh, in my hometown. I taught school for a year. That did not work out. Got a job in a mill at a bolt factory for a year, worked there trying to run. And then finally, over a period of time, I had some friends and I ended up getting hired as an instructor, a physical education instructor at the Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is really where things began to happen for me. And you probably have that information in terms of National Junior College background with our Allegheny running team. My best friend at the time, one of my good friends, a Kent graduate, was the athletic director at Allegheny Community College, which is called CCAC. People called us Allegheny. He was the AD there, and he had told me over a period of years that if he ever got a job where he could bring me in as a coach, he would do that. And then I got a real nice break from him and got hired at the community college, North Side, Pittsburgh, right across from the football stadium there, that started in 1973. And I taught there for 40 years.
Before we go on to discussing that at what I call ACC and all that 70s decade and the kind of ridiculous success of the teams there. Let's just, with the name dropping of Jim Ryan that everyone who's run knows, what kind of relationships or friendships or rivalries, what was the feeling you had with Jim Ryan and some of the other people? I mean, he was your main rival, it sounds like. How'd that go?
quite well, actually. We became friends. We didn't hang out together, but when we saw each other at meets, we spoke. I became friends with so many distance runners and milers at that time. And one special thing that happened. Now, obviously, throughout your career, you meet runners in your event along the way. Usually it's in the warm-up areas, or it's in the hotels where all of the athletes are housed. It's after races where you shake hands, and then you do cool downs together. So over a period of time, you develop relationships with all of the runners of that era. But what was really a special time, when all of the runners really got to know one another, a special group, was at the 1968 Olympic trials. We were all sent up to Lake Tahoe at a place called Echo Summit, and the entire Olympic group of athletes in all events who qualified for the Olympic trials were housed at 7,200 feet in trailers at the top of that mountain. And you've probably seen photos of the track that was had pine trees in the center of the track, beautiful setting. And we really got to know each other at altitude, and we were there for 12 weeks. So we spent a lot of time together, and we became friends over that period of time. But all of those years that I was racing, you develop a lot of great relationships. And with Ryan, after we both finished our college careers, and if you remember the ITA, which was a short-lived professional group that sort of set a precedence for what you have today in terms of professionalism. I even roomed with Jim a couple times at some indoor meets. So we would go to breakfast together and talk. And I'm on Facebook with Jim now. His wife Ann does most of the work on Facebook. So we're still old friends. In fact, he came to Greensburg one year and was a speaker for a youth group down there. And I drove in from Pittsburgh to just spend some time with him there when he came in to speak. So we're old friends, not close friends, but old friends. And there are a number of runners that I became friends with. And if you know, Frank Shorter is an old friend, trained with him down in Florida when I was with the Florida Track Club. Dave Waddle, who's our Olympic champ, Bowling Green kid. I was a Kent kid. So many relationships and people that I've known over the years from that particular era, that and some of those guys aren't here anymore. Guys like Tom von Ruden, who made the Olympic team at altitude in '68 when we were up there. A lot of those guys aren't with us anymore, but it was a fun time to be an athlete, albeit you were still an amateur. You know, you're trying to you couldn't make a living. It was very difficult to train and race without an income. That you had to work, you had to get a real job in order to compete, and that was extremely difficult.
Did you see the change in that when the gray area came, where money wasn't officially allowed and the envelopes were being passed? Were you competing during any of that?
What happened during that period? Now I'm going to bring the ITA into this conversation. That was the group that sort of became professional. And I forget the man's name who started it. Mike Ryan or Mike, I forget his last name, but anyway, I signed a contract, no bonus money or anything, and chose to run with the ITA. That included guys like Ryan von Ruden. I think Jerry Lindgren got involved with that. I roomed a lot with a guy named Mike Mosser, All-American from West Virginia, Lee Evans. A lot of really good runners got involved with it, and we went from one city to the next, and you'd get $500 if you would win. I think it was $250 or $300 for second place, and $100 or so for third. Now, the ITA lasted for 2 or 3 years, and then it just sort of, and at that time, at the end of that 2 or 3 year period, money started to come into play. Now, however, prior to that, there was money being handed out in envelopes to athletes to compete. And most of us, I didn't get any money, but I knew people who did. And most of us were tired of that. You know, we wanted to make money just like other professional athletes. And we'd like to think that we were the forerunners of professionalism that finally began. And what I saw later on was when Frank Shorter won the marathon in 72, the road racing boom began. And it started with a trickle, but then it really got big after a few years. And I saw a lot of money being made under the table with road racing. A lot of guys were making a ton of money. In fact, I called the late Barry Brown, whom, if you remember Barry Brown, he was a great distance runner. He almost made the Olympic team in the steeplechase. And Barry was in Florida at that time. And I had actually gone down and trained with his group with Frank Shorter, Jack Batchelor, Barry, another guy named Jerry Slavin was there. And I trained with those guys for about 8 months before I came back to Pittsburgh, again, because I couldn't make enough money to survive. Anyway, I talked to Barry and I said, Barry, how much money are they paying you under the table to come to all these big road races? And he said, my standard fee is $500. Now, we're going back 40 years. That's a lot of money 40 years ago. A lot of money.
Right.
And if Barry was making that kind of money, I can imagine what some of those other guys were making. And when I quit the ITA, I came back to Pittsburgh and I thought, okay, maybe I'll just start to go to some road races. And I went to a couple of local road races. And then I finally, trying to think of the race that I attended, I went to, I believe it was Charleston. Went down to Charleston and I finished 11th in the Charleston road race. When I got back to Pittsburgh, our name was in the paper. When I got back to Pittsburgh, I got a call from the AAU telling me that I was banned for the next 5 years because of I was a professional track athlete. I had a hearing with 3 officials from the AAU with a lawyer about 3 or 4 months later to try and get my eligibility back. They refused. And for the next 5 years, I was banned from racing. In fact, I even went to a few road races and would enter my name in a lot of local road races, pay an entry fee, and then I would tell the meet director, I'm going to drop out of the race just before the finish line. Let the people know in the race that I'm running an exhibition. And that's what I did for the next 5 years. So I was banned by the AAU for 5 years for probably winning over a 2.5 year period, maybe $1,500. Now,
Wow.
that still bothers me today. I am still pissed off about that because so much money was being made on the roads at that time. It was a joke. And they made me into some sort of a scapegoat. And those years, I wasn't going to go back to, I just wanted to go run local races, maybe some regional, and have some fun, which I could not do for the next 5 years.
Wow. That is an incredible story. Do you know anybody else that happened to?
Most of the, it's funny, most of the guys that I was involved with the ITA, they were track oriented guys. And when the ITA folded, they didn't go to the roads like I did. And I really really enjoyed road racing. It was a lot of fun. You didn't have the stress that you had when you walked out on the track in road races. And so primarily that group, no one complained. None of those guys went out to the roads and raced. They would have been ineligible anyway.
I think I'd like to do. I'm going to have to cut us off and do a session. I think we'll cover ACC completely in a different session. So if you have a little bit of time now, I'd like to ask you about up until then, say up until 72, 73, what were the significant changes in any equipment, what you had learned from there at the beginning of the 60s? And just a comment, when did it come to you that you would be involved in coaching? When along that did you say, hey, long range, that's what I'll do? But what changes had you seen in the sport? It's great that the money discussion you just had really puts it into perspective what was going on at that time frame. But what else was changing in the sport?
Well, again, I would go back to 72 when Frank got that gold. Everyone started running. It was just there was a time when I moved to Pittsburgh and started coaching. And I would drive out to an area, North Park, which is a beautiful area north of Pittsburgh, several thousand acres. And I would go out there and run and not see anyone. And once the running boom hit, there was a slow, consistent trickle that eventually just turned around. Everything turned around, and the running boom set in, and everything changed. There were more races, more opportunities to go to different types of track meets. Everything just expanded from really a rudimentary running area to this giant running boom that occurred. And it just, everything changed. Plus there was more research involved, and that's something that has changed. There were books written about running, how to train, Runner's World, Gatorade, all equipment, even. And you look at what we have available today that was not available then. It was just everything just expanded, and the whole dynamic of running changed, and it was beautiful to see. You go out to North Park now, and my God, there's groups of teams are out there training. There's individuals out there training. It's just expanded so much over the last 30, 40 years. It's completely changed.
Okay, before we do a whole session on your ACC career, what about you then transitioning out of the sport? How did that affect you psychologically to go from being the elite athlete, the competitor? You could run, you had to fake your way and jump off before the finish line to get no one in trouble. But what did that do? How did you go through that transition in life that everybody's going to face?
I think for me, once I got away from the track and the road racing started, I lost that edge, high level of motivation to race at a high level. And the timing for me individually was perfect, because in 73, my friend Neil Cohen hired me at Allegheny to come in and coach the team that he had been coaching for a couple of years. ACC added a health and physical education program, and I saw the transition coming, and I thought, well, I still enjoy running on the roads, and what I'll do is I'll just train with these kids, but I'll make sure that when I do train with them, I will give them the workouts that they needed to do, and I would just run with them as opposed to giving them workouts that I wanted to do. And I wasn't that much older than these guys, so we were almost like teammates as opposed to me being a coach. And Neil had a lot to do with that, because when Neil hired me, he told me, he said, look, all I want you to do is train with these kids and coach them. I will do all of the recruiting. You'll be teaching classes full time. You'll teach 15 credits a semester, but you get these kids out to run, and you're the coach. I'm the athletic director and recruiter. So the burden of recruitment is out of your hands, and we'll bring it. I'll get the good kids. You coach them. And that transition for me was absolutely perfect, because I got to spend a lot of time with these kids, and it was a lot of fun for me because I had kept all of my training diaries, and I was able to look back into them and find resources that I could use in order to coach these kids and do right by these kids. And it was a lot of fun. And I did not mind losing my competitive edge. That the coaching kind of took over for that, and I really enjoyed my job of coaching these kids. Now, what a lot of people don't know was that when I actually started my career there and when I ended my career there, I was never paid a dime for coaching. I was a full-time physical education instructor teaching full-time, 15 credits a semester, and night classes as well. And so I never got paid a dime to coach, not one penny.
Oh, that's amazing. Why didn't they pay you? Would you have taken money?
I would have taken money. I knew I had heard of other junior colleges. The coaches were paid to coach, or they got free time. For example, some of the coaches might only coach or teach 9 credits instead of 15 credits like I was teaching, and get 6 credits for coaching. That didn't happen. That's just the way it was. And I accepted that. And so, yeah, I was coaching 15 credits and coaching the kids. We got them apartments in the city, and that's how it was. And I now, not to take it any further than that, but after our successes that we were having, I had some offers to leave. I got some phone calls, but I stayed.
What about your career, your personality, the struggles you had in school, or not necessarily the struggles, but your preference to make it as little of your focus as possible? How did that inform or transform when you became an instructor and a teacher? What kind of teacher were you?
Probably, I think the kids enjoyed my company. I do. I was not a strict instructor. You know, kids had certain rules they had to follow. They had to, class attendance was important. Because I was at a 2-year school, a community college, inner city, we had a wide spectrum of students. We had some fresh-faced kids right out of high school. We had some men and women in transition. We had a lot of women that were coming in that may have been in difficult marital situations. We're getting, the average age at the time was, I think, around 28 years of age. And when I started teaching, we had a ton of Vietnam vets coming to college on the GI Bill, who I used to generally teach at night, usually it was a health class in a classroom, or sometimes I would have what was called a physical conditioning and weight training class in the phys ed building where I'd bring these guys in. And I actually had a class, a 3-credit class of Vietnam veterans. I had 100 veterans in my night class at one time. I had a ton of those guys for several years. So I kind of identified with those guys, and I identified with the students, because like I said, when I started out as a student, I wasn't very good. And a lot of the students that I had, they were at junior college, and a number of them didn't, their SAT scores were low, and that's why I had them. I had a number of kids who had flunked out of 4-year schools who were students of mine. So I could really identify with them. And I took my time with these kids. And I used to say, look, this is the best place in the world for you. Hang in there. You can do this. I was kind of like that myself when I was younger. And I really enjoyed the entire 40 years that I was actually teaching there. And I like to think that when I walked away 10 years ago, that I think I had the respect of a lot of students, and I think they enjoyed their time with me in the classroom. And it's funny because when I got to Kent, like I said, I almost flunked out of school. And by the time I left the college, I was a full professor. And I have to pinch myself to think about that, because I was always felt that I was an academic underachiever. So I'd like to think that I've had a lucky life, and I've been very fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, no doubt that gave you a great perspective on these students coming from different backgrounds and challenges. That's fantastic. I think I'm going to ask that we
Hold up.
resume to talk just about Allegheny going forward, but maybe I'll ask you here, and maybe I'll use this, or you'll think about it and answer it again lately. But I would like to talk about a little bit about your personal life, and when in all of this did you get married? Of course, your son became a great runner. Let's talk about that distinction you and Sam Bair Jr. have. And when did you get married to I can tell everybody your wife Arlene is worked through the technical difficulties to get us to talk today. She sounds like she's still working. She's in social work, another service profession. But when did you meet and get together with her?
Okay. You're going to love this story. When I was teaching at CCAC, it was the end of my first year. She was in my health class, my future wife. She sat in the back of my health class. I used to come in every day and lecture, and there was this girl who sat in the back of my health class, and I noticed her right away at the beginning of the semester. And I always felt that I had to be professional with this young lady. So I had her for an entire 15-week semester. But in those days, you got the names and addresses and phone numbers of your students. Nowadays, all you get is a social security number. Something, you don't get that. You're not allowed to have that information. So I waited. When the semester ended, I waited a month, and I had her phone number. And I've told this story many times before. I called her on the phone, and I said, may I speak to Arlene? And she was on the phone, and there were a bunch of girls in the background. She was with her friends, and it was a regular telephone in those days. You didn't have a cell phone. And I said, hi, Arlene. I don't know if you remember me. My name is Sam Bair, and you were in my health class at CCAC. And there was a little silence, and she finally said, did you sit on the left of me or the right of me? And then I said, no. I said, I was the teacher that stood up in front of the class. And I hear this muffling in the background. And then as she gets back on the phone, and I hear these girls in the background are laughing. And the first words out of her mouth were, how tall are you? How tall are you? And of course, I did the right thing. I lied. And I said, I'm about 5'8". And she said, okay. and that was it. So I went to her house later, a couple of days later, and we started dating, and the whole thing ended successfully. But that's how much of an impact I met on her. She didn't even know who I was when I called her up.
That's fantastic. All right. Let's just have I mean, we're going to need to talk about this again, but just your first thoughts. What about how involved were you in your son's running approach and career?
When Sam started running, I saw that he had ability right away. And even as a seventh grader, he ran a 56-second 400. He ran a 53 as an eighth grader. And then as a ninth grader, he ended up running 156 in the 800. Anyway, he had really good success. And I live 3/4 of a mile from our high school stadium, and the coaches knew who I was. So when Sam came along in the middle school with his running, and then when he became a freshmen obviously are eligible now, I went up to the track to watch him work out, and the head coach came over to me and he said, "How about if you come on board as a coach and we have a distance coach, but why don't you help our distance coach out? I know your son's going to be good. That way you can be involved with Sam." Like, I did not approach them and say, "That's my boy, I want to coach." They came to me, and they knew me from years ago. They knew my reputation, obviously, for many years. And Don Bender was the man's name at Shaler Area High School here in Pittsburgh. I actually think I played some football against him when I was I scored 3 touchdowns against him, his team, when I was playing football in high school. Anyway, he remembered me.
He may. I was going to say he may remember that. Yeah.
And so he said, "Why don't you come?" So I got involved with Sam early, and ended up coaching him for the next 4 years, and it was a great experience. The only unfortunate thing that happened with Sam was his senior year, he did not run track because he broke his navicular bone. So we had a couple years there. He missed an entire year of racing, because if you're familiar with a navicular fracture, that's a non-weight bearing injury. And the navicular bone, they say, is the second worst bone you can break in your foot, because when that bone breaks, there's not much circulation, and it takes forever for that bone to heal. And again, non-weight bearing. So he was on crutches for 10 weeks. His entire right side atrophied as a result of that. So it was a year and a half before he even practically started running again. And he was at Kent State as a freshman. He came back and he transferred to Pitt. And then whenever I went over and talked to the Pitt coach to ask the Pitt coach if he would let Sam run on their track team, he invited me to coach. He said, "Well, why don't you come and help us out?" And I knew the old Pitt coach, Alonzo Webb. I had known him for many years. He was actually a high jumper at CCAC, the Allegheny, when he was in junior college. And so Alonzo was the head coach. We had a history together, so he invited me to come and help coach with Sam at the University of Pittsburgh. So I spent 4 years there as still teaching full-time at CCAC at Allegheny, and then traveling and going to practice every day with my son for the next 4 years. So that turned out to be a great experience.
They didn't pay you either, did they?
No, but there were a lot of great perks. I have to admit, we traveled first class everywhere. The buses were fantastic. I went to the NCAA, all the NCAA meets, Sacramento. My gosh, I had a wonderful, wonderful time at Pitt. I just wish, the college over there they don't have a track. University of Pittsburgh has no outdoor track. They run at a place called Shenley Park, they have a track there, and they use Carnegie Mellon's track, which is right around the corner for training. And they have an indoor facility that's ancient, so that they need to get a facility over there. And should they get one, I think their fortunes on the distance side will improve greatly. but yeah, I had a great time at Pitt too.
All right, let's cut this off. That's a fantastic session. I think that's a great episode. And it's really fun talking to you, but I think uh, we've covered a lot, and it would be great to pick up a discussion just about your whole Allegheny career and anything else that comes up. And as you're talking about the people, your approach, I'm going to ask one more thing now, just be we'll see where it fits in. But what do you think, if you could think back to what you were thinking when you got initially hired, what did you think would become of you as a coach? What did you think you could contribute, and what did you see the future being did you have any vision then?
Not so much. I enjoyed being around kids in a it's hard to explain, but I felt that I had an ability to identify with kids on their level, and I could treat each one as an individual. And I had thought from time to time, well, maybe I will end up someday going to a big time 4-year school. And like I said, I had aspirations to go in that regard. However, at that specific time in history, college coaches, albeit they were very dedicated, didn't make a lot of money. You know, those guys were not making the kinds of money that big time Division I coaches make these days. And when I was actually offered the Kent State job. When my old coach, Doug Raymond, got ready to retire, he called me and he said, "Would you like to take my job at Kent State? You can have it." And I turned him down because I knew how much money he was making. And I was making almost that same amount of money teaching here in Pittsburgh without the stress that's involved with that type of job. So I turned him down at the time. Plus, I felt that I don't have quite the background for coaching because he was coaching all the different events at that time. So I didn't feel that I had the background, but the money was not there. But then recently I've heard how much money a lot of these coaches are making, and I'm thinking, oh, it's pretty good now. But at the time, you know, I'm teaching 15 credits. I'm going out and I'm training with my kids. We're all friends. We're having a ball. Why do I want to change that? So but I had thought maybe in the future I would end up at a big time 4-year school. However, you know, it's funny. I didn't want to go anywhere. I was really, I felt obligated to Neil Cohen, our athletic director, and I really would like to have had him with me because the man had a gift for recruiting, and that was his specialty, and that would have taken a lot of pressure away from me, and I could have done what I did best, which was get involved with the kids once I had them in my hands and coach them the way I wanted, and my free time wouldn't be taken away from them, or my time with them taken away with recruiting. So I never, like I said, I had offers to leave, but I decided to stay in Pittsburgh because I started making pretty good money after that. And why walk away when I was very happy? Plus, I was an only child. My wife was an only child. Our parents were here, and our kids were being raised here. And we felt that we had an obligation to them as well, not to leave them. And so we were pretty much decided to just stay here in Pittsburgh.
Well, thanks for telling all that. It's a well balanced, well told story. To the good fortune of Allegheny, all that stuff conspired to give you this ideal life where the solutions were there. And I'm sure you thought about it, and things come and go, but that's well told, and it's really nice. But let me cut this off, and I will be editing this, and we won't be publishing till August. I got 5 or 6 of these filled up, so we'll talk more about I'd love to get a photo collection from you too. When I publish this, we can put as many photos that people want to dream. So we can over time find out who's got the best photo collection. Just email them to me. We'll put them up. But I'll get started editing this, and then we'll have another session early next week if we can connect just like this to talk about your Allegheny career.
Okay.
That's great.
There's one thing I want to mention. Maybe I shouldn't, but I might. There's a gentleman that's writing a book about our Allegheny team.
Wow.
He's a professor at CCAC, and his name is Steve Wells. And he's been working on this book for the last 5 years. And he's gathered a ton of information. And I haven't talked to him for a few months, but I know that I had signed a release form, and he had found an agent who was going to pitch this book to some publishers. And I haven't talked to Steve for a while, but there's apparently a book in the process.
Wow. If you can get a hold of him, find out if it's okay for us to mention it.
All right.
Yeah, make sure it's not confidential, but that's no problem. We'll keep it out. Personally, I can remember the Miracle Mile book describing there's a book called The Miracle Mile, and it was Landy Bannister, and it was announced by the American guy who then went into the service, so he didn't run. But it's when they got together and ran, and I thought, oh my! And I hadn't gotten hurt yet, so I ran through. I was 18, and I was like, I want to act in this movie, and I want and the people bought the rights to the book who made the Seabiscuit movie. And I said, wow, they understand that there's stories to tell here, and they understand how to make a sports movie. And so they bought the rights, and the Miracle Mile has never been made. And the Allegheny College would be a great time period movie too.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it? Yeah, I have no more aspiration. Well, I got hurt. I have no more aspiration by saying, yeah, I love it when there's a movie that the running doesn't look like actors jogging too. And
right. Exactly.
You could actually have people that runners say, hey, they're actually running.
Yeah, that's true.
But there's also a guy who wrote a book called Tales of the Times. Bob Hodge. And so he's written about the change of running. So I'm going to talk to him soon. I remember. Yeah. So Bob's written a book. He just published it maybe 3 years ago. So I haven't gotten a hold of it. It's not. You can't find it anywhere. Amazon probably has some copies. So yeah, that's it. But yeah, it's a missed story. That story. Well, there was Boulder, Eugene, Boston, and Western Pennsylvania with these pockets of incredible running story development of the sport. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go. I've just got signal from my wife. I got to help with dinner. Okay. Thanks for your time, Sam. Have a great weekend. We'll talk next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. How do I turn off this? Here. We're done.
I apologize.